Hey there, my name is Blake Crooks, and I am a counselor at the Counseling Center, and
And
I'm joined by my colleague.
hey, I'm Jenna Tomalski, and I'm a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center. And we're really excited to be with you all today to talk about Harry Potter.
Yeah, so this is the last workshop in a three-part series that we've titled Harry Potter and the Magic of Mental Health. And for this workshop, we'll be focusing on defense against the dark thoughts. So some objectives for today's lesson. We're going to be talking about anxiety and depression, what those look like, some of the symptoms, and then we'll be looking at some cognitive coping strategies. So thinking about how we might be able to work with these symptoms, as well as discussing mindfulness strategies and how those can be implemented into coping as well.
But first, we always like to start with a Harry Potter question of the day. So Blake, what class would you be most excited about taking at Hogwarts?
So I'm actually rereading the series right now, and I'm reading the Order of the Phoenix right now, and I feel like the Defense Against the Dark Arts class would be the most fun. I just feel like it's very like action oriented, but I also feel like I would really enjoy Care of Magical Creatures.
Hmm. I feel like Defense Against the Dark Arts is dark arts. That's really hard to say fast.
Yeah,
Feels very appropriate for today's topic.
yeah.
I think I would really be excited about taking charms and learning all the spells. And I feel like it would be really helpful right now since I'm just sitting at a desk all day to say like Accio water, like Accio muffin, and
Right.
not have to get up and everything could just come to me.
Hmm.
But thanks for answering.
Great. Yeah.
So first, we're going to talk about what is anxiety. So if we're talking about managing these dark thoughts, and a lot of times when we're experiencing anxiety, a lot of dark thoughts can kind of come with that. And so in general, anxiety is this kind of fear, worry, or unease, often about an event that might happen in the future, something that might happen in the future. And it can involve those thoughts, it can involve emotions. And often influenced by stress. So stress and anxiety are two different things. Stress is kind of an event that we can really attribute this to, whereas anxiety feels kind of like this overwhelming or overarching sense of unease and is usually ongoing in nature. And so some common signs and symptoms of anxiety, and just as a caveat, this is going to look unique for each person. So as you're looking at these different signs and symptoms, you might see that, yes, that absolutely fits with my experience of anxiety, or I don't usually recognize that as a sign, and that's okay. We have these listed there. It's not an exhaustive list. Each person experiences anxiety in a different way. So this just helps us understand what are some of those common symptoms and what things we might be able to manage as we go through the presentation. So for thoughts, often we see a lot of racing thoughts. You might recognize that your mind feels kind of like a train going at 100 miles an hour. Thoughts just come right after another, which can make it really hard to concentrate, especially in class, and even having some of that hypervigilance of always being on edge with those thoughts. Physically, sometimes people often have more of a physical experience of anxiety and notice that first. And so that can be our heart rate's really increasing. We feel that shortness of breath and have a lot of muscle tension. I don't know about you. I always notice at the end of the day when I've been feeling kind of anxious, my shoulders are like up here. And it's not until I'm like, oh man, like my shoulders have been really tense that I recognize, oh, okay, like I've been anxious about an upcoming project or something that's happening. We also see a lot of different behaviors with anxiety. So one of the big ones is avoidance, whether it's trying to avoid the thoughts that we're thinking or whether we avoid certain situations. So if we're really anxious about meeting new people, maybe we avoid going out. Maybe we avoid going out to hang out with friends because of that anxiety. Sometimes difficulty speaking. If you've ever done a kind of a presentation in front of a lot of people and feeling some of that anxiety about that, it can feel like stuttering over words. And then again, we see a lot of different emotions associated with anxiety, and this can be nervousness, again, feeling that on edge or feeling edgy, and then a lot of times feeling really frustrated, whether it's, I can't believe I'm still thinking this way, or I'm just so anxious, I'm so like frustrated with other people. So we see a lot of different signs and symptoms. And again, as you're looking through this, see what fits with your experience and maybe what doesn't fit as much, and that's okay.
And so we'll also be talking about depression. Depression often involves feelings of sadness and loss of interest in things you once enjoyed. And this is not to be confused with sadness. Depression and sadness can feel or look similar, but depression is kind of like anxiety, more longer lasting, more ongoing. It can lead to emotional and physical difficulties. It typically has an impact on your functioning and is common and treatable. So we can also talk about some more of the specific signs and symptoms for that. So as Jenna was talking about anxiety, again, these symptoms are general, and it's important to notice that there may be things that you relate to, as well as there may be things that you might experience or know that other people experience that aren't listed. So again, these are unique for each person. And we've categorized them into thoughts, physical symptoms, behaviors, and emotions as well. So people who might be experiencing depression, their thoughts might be impacted by having poor concentration, difficulty in making decisions, and even having suicidal thoughts. Um, some of the physical symptoms of depression could be changes in appetite, so losing your appetite or gaining an appetite, um, and experiencing decreased energy. Oftentimes people feel really fatigued, feeling really slow and heavy. There can be some body aching, just a general change in your demeanor. Um, some behaviors that can be associated with depression include isolating yourself or withdrawing socially. So maybe feeling that you're not feeling the same as you normally are, and that people will notice that too, and that can often lead to wanting to isolate, even not having the energy to socialize with others too. Um, so again, slowed movements. There can even be challenges with sleep. You might notice yourself wanting to sleep more, or even being unable to sleep. Um, some common emotions that can be experienced with depression, as we said earlier, include sadness. There can also be some apathy, so just kind of feeling like a loss of interest in things. And then anhedonia, so that's the loss of pleasure that or enjoyment that something might bring. So people might find themselves not feeling as excited about going to the gym, even though that might be a hobby that they find to be like a passion of theirs. They might lose that sense of pleasure from that, which can then make it more difficult to feel motivated to do those things. There can be feelings of worthlessness and guilt as well that kind of create, kind of added to that sadness and the thoughts that people might be experiencing.
And so we've talked about anxiety, depression, all of these different symptoms. And so likely you might be thinking, okay, great, now what do I do with that? So how can we protect ourselves from these dark thoughts, or how can we manage them when they come up? And so just like Blake had said, he'd be really excited about taking Defense Against the Dark Arts, where students prepare magical spells for protection against creatures and other spells and opponents. We can similarly learn skills and coping strategies and different mindsets to support in defending our mental health from dark thoughts. whether that is specific skills or how we view our thoughts and how we interact with our feelings, and recognizing that this takes practice. So even Harry Potter had to really practice his, oh my gosh, what is that spell he always uses?
Expecto Patronum?
No, the like disarming one. Why can't I?
Expelliarmus.
Expelliarmus.
Yeah.
He got so good at Expelliarmus because that's like all he used. But it requires a lot of practice, and sometimes the support of others, whether that be friends, family, or even a professional counselor. And additionally, just recognizing that these skills might not always resolve the specific concern. Sometimes it takes a combination of skills or adjusting these skills to fit our needs. And so with this, we're not looking to kind of fix the situation, but we're looking at how can we view it in a different perspective? How can we relate differently with our thoughts and feelings to feel more empowered in managing these stressors and this anxiety, depression that might come up?
Yeah, and I think like I'm thinking because I'm rereading The Order of the Phoenix, I'm thinking about Dumbledore's army and how that practice really comes into play there. You see so many people trying to learn how to do certain spells, and then as you were saying, like sometimes the support of others is really helpful, and so being able to like tap into your support systems is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not doing this alone, and that's okay.
So boggarts are a creature that were introduced in The Prisoner of Azkaban. And so these are creatures that take on your worst fear, which can kind of be similar to anxiety. Anxiety oftentimes creates worst case scenarios. So um, with defending yourself against the boggart, you got to think flexibly. So in the books, the spell Ridiculous is used to defend against the boggarts. And to use that against the boggart, you have to recognize your fear and then be able to change what the boggart is presenting as into something funny. So when we look at the definition for coping, it's to struggle or deal with something with some degree of success. So being able to successfully or in a calm manner do something in response to something. So in facing the boggarts, you might be able to notice fear, but you're also able to, in a calm manner, um, cope with that in the moment. And so that can be helpful. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
I think you bring up that good point of like where anxiety and depression can also often bring up that avoidance or bring up that isolation. And by managing our bogarts, we're coping, which is an active verb. We're doing something, whether it's acknowledging it, reframing it, and we'll get into some more of those techniques. But we really want to reduce that avoidance because, like you said, often that anxiety brings us the worst case scenario. And so we're like, no, I don't want to deal with it.
Right. That's kind of where I was wanting to go. So like with the avoidance piece and anxiety. So if you think about the boggart taking on like the form of like the worst case scenario or something that you're really scared of, it makes sense why you might want to avoid that. But then you're not able to move forward. That boggart's kind of getting in your way. So we may not be able to make the boggart go away completely, but by being able to like change how you're perceiving it or the way you're responding to it, you might be able to change the boggart and still be able to move forward.
Definitely.
Good save.
Teamwork. So one of the ways we'll talk about kind of cognitive coping strategies. And so I'm going to give props to Blake on this one. Expecto Patronum, more like cognitivo restructurum, which is the non-actual Latin way of saying cognitive restructuring. So we can think of dementors, right? They're another creature that students learn to protect themselves of by using magic. And so, as you know, dementors really instill this sense of despair, sadness, really sucking the joy out of the room and out of ourselves. And so the spell to protect ourselves against Dementors, expecto patronum. So thinking of a really happy memory, thinking of something that brings us joy, and using that as a barrier, as a way to reframe or get rid of or move the Dementors aside so that we can continue to move forward. So cognitive restructuring, what is that? So one, like we mentioned before, we have to recognize that these Dementors are kind of coming at us, and that these dark thoughts and these uncomfortable sensations are kind of within our scope. And so we want to, one of the ways we can deal with that is by reframing. And so we can ask ourselves some questions to do that. We can challenge the thought. So say I have this Dementor, this thought of that nobody likes me. So I can challenge the thought, considering the evidence that supports the thought, and then considering the evidence that invalidates the thought. So maybe for supporting it, I think, well, you know, I texted Blake the other day and he didn't respond and left me unread, and that means he doesn't like me, and that makes me really sad. And so I can say, okay, well, there's the support, Blake didn't respond. Then I can consider the evidence that invalidates the thought and say, well, he did text me this morning, we're doing this presentation together, we've hung out in the past. Just because he did this once doesn't mean that he hates me. Okay, I can kind of balance this. I can recognize there's part that supports it and part that invalidates it. And what am I gonna we're putting the thought on trial. What's supported, what's not. And likely when we really start to think about it, we see that there's more evidence that invalidates the thought, because it can be really easy to kind of take one example and generalize it to every situation, or say, well, this one thing means all of these different other things about me. And when we take the time, take a step back to use our cognitivo restructurum spell, we can see, okay, there are all these other things that really invalidate it. My friends do like me. We went to lunch the other day. They send me funny memes. Okay, this one event doesn't have to cloud everything. And then we can also question the thought. And so we sometimes can think of thoughts not necessarily as good or bad, but we can think of them as like, is this helping me right now? And is this thought supporting me? So thinking that Blake hates me and isn't my friend, is that helpful for me moving forward? Does that help us do this presentation? Does that help me feel supported and validated? Okay, no. What would be a more supportive or more helpful thought? Well, maybe Blake overslept. He didn't see my text. He had other things to do right now. He'll text me later. We can kind of give other examples or other thoughts that can reframe or restructure that original thought. So again, it's a lot about recognizing that this thought might not be super helpful, or that it feels really overwhelming, and then taking the time to use our skills, use this spell of, we can challenge it, we can question it, is this helpful, is it not, and what will be helpful moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, when I think about the expecto patronum spell, I think about like how to use it. You have to think about like happier thoughts, even like amid having all these dark thoughts in that moment. So again, kind of highlighting like being flexible in your way of thinking, and being able to like step out of that, and that can take some effort and practice.
And how powerful is it, even when we have these more dark thoughts, that we can also hold those lighter thoughts and those happy thoughts. So that's a really, I like you brought that up.
Mm-hmm. Both can be true. Or both can exist, not necessarily both can be true. So the devil's snare is a plant that's introduced to us in the first book. And so this is a plant that loves the dark, and it can wrap you up when you're experiencing panic. So it's kind of like quicksand. The more you struggle with it, the more it persists, and the more it's able to take hold of you. So one thing that Hermione kind of approaches it is kind of saying like, okay, you have to relax in order to get past this when they're trapped in it. So with anxiety, one thing that can be helpful is utilizing mindful acceptance. And so a lot of times when people first hear acceptance, they think that, oh, you want me to accept my anxiety and that it's okay for me to feel anxious. And so we don't necessarily mean acceptance and kind of giving up or accepting that this is what you want to be experiencing, but approaching acceptance with the idea that this is what you're experiencing in the moment. And as Jenna was saying earlier, a lot of times with anxiety, there can be this avoidance. And so with acceptance, you're kind of taking um, you're approaching it head forward. And so with adding mindfulness to that, you're practicing a non-judgmental awareness of what you're experiencing in that moment. So taking a moment to just check in with yourself. What are the things that you're experiencing in that moment? And doing so in a non-judgmental way, because if you're practicing some judgment on yourself, you're kind of kicking yourself while you're already down, which doesn't make us feel any better. And so with that awareness, bringing your focus back to the present moment, kind of shifting, okay, like I am feeling anxious right now. I'm feeling that fear. Maybe I'm feeling really tense or restless. And then bringing yourself back to what's going on around you. And just changing your relationship with the anxiety. So sometimes we can work to change our thoughts, and that can be helpful. And sometimes our thoughts can be pretty persistent, or there may be some validity in our thoughts. So with mindful acceptance, we're able to kind of say, okay, yes, I am feeling anxious in this moment, and what can I do to work with it? So rather than kind of getting stuck with the anxiety and continuing to resist it, um, letting yourself relax and move forward. Kind of like if you've ever tangled up your headphones and you're really frustrated and you're trying to get them undone and they just keep getting more tangled. When you're able to slow down and kind of take a look at what's going on, say like, oh yeah, like let me unloop it here, unloop it there, and then we got it solved. The same way with anxiety. So a lot of times one of those symptoms can be racing thoughts. So giving yourself a moment to slow down, kind of think through the thoughts. Okay, these are the things that are coming up, and maybe those aren't feeling really helpful for me right now. Let's kind of refocus into what feels important to me in this moment. So saying like, yeah, maybe I am feeling anxious right now. It's not fun, but it's okay for me to be feeling anxious about it. And this is what's important to me. So an example might be, say you have a test that's coming up, and finals is right around the corner. So you might be experiencing some anxiety about a particular exam, and with that you might be dreading studying the material because it might be something challenging, or you're worried that you might not succeed as much as you would like. And so if we listen to that anxiety, we might find ourselves avoiding studying in general because it doesn't feel good to sit in that discomfort. But the more we kind of resist that, the more that anxiety continues to take hold of us. And so with mindful acceptance, we can kind of take a look at that anxiety and say like, yeah, I'm feeling really anxious about this exam. And I also want to at least give it a try, or at least do my best. And so I may not be able to do 100% while feeling anxious, but how can I maybe do 25% of what I want to do, or maybe 50%? How can I take one step out of that devil snare rather than sitting in the devil snare?
And I think right now, especially with the pandemic that we're in and the COVID-19 situation, likely there's a heightened experience of anxiety and depression among a lot of you. And it's really easy to get caught in that devil's snare of when is this going to end? There's a lot of uncertainty. We're mourning the loss of different events, situation, people. And I think now is a really great time where we can practice some of this mindful acceptance. right? It might be really hard to reframe and like get rid of those dark thoughts of, I don't know when this is going to end, I don't know what's going to happen, because there is some validity to that. And when we're able to notice that and give ourselves some of that compassion, that non-judgmental nature of, I'm experiencing these emotions, I'm recognizing what's happening, how can I let go of this need for control? How can I change my relationship with this anxiety, for like what Blake was saying, to move forward? I'm noticing I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling scared. That's okay. What can I do now to take one step forward? Do I need to take a bubble bath? Do I want to reach out to family, friends? Do I want to watch a Netflix show that brings me joy? And just recognizing and accepting, as opposed to saying, well, I can't think that way, or just trying to think positively when we're still feeling all these emotions.
And I think about from the series, Devil Snare also does not like the light. So sometimes getting outside when you're able to can be a helpful way of fighting off anxiety, especially during this time when a lot of us are spending most of our day inside.
Yeah, even if it's just walking out on your porch or walking out into the parking lot, getting some sunlight, and hopefully it starts getting warmer soon. But getting some of that light, getting some of that outdoors, if that feels good to you. So to kind of wrap up, we went through a lot of information. So just kind of pointing out anxiety, depression, they're really common. And again, we might be feeling more of those heightened emotions and thoughts with this current situation. Again, it's very common and treatable. There are common and treatable mental health concerns. And we have a number of different spells or skills, from a cognitive reframing to a mindful acceptance, that can help manage our dark thoughts. And again, sometimes it takes a lot of practice. It can take a lot of support. And so if, as you've been listening to this presentation and something's really stood out to you, or you have more questions, we really encourage you to reach out to the App State Counseling Center. We're still up and running. Services might just look a little bit different, but we're still here for support. You can also check out our website. It has a lot of really great self-help resources, as well as Anxiety Toolbox, which also Blake and I run as well, that give a lot more specific coping skills that we actually practice in session. So we really encourage you to check out all the resources that can help build up your spells and build up your skill set to help manage these different experiences that are coming up.
Yeah, and like this workshop, it was inspired by the Harry Potter series, so I think it can always be helpful to revisit the series and kind of take a look at, like, what are certain challenges that some characters experienced and what are the things that supported them through that. Kind of taking a look at like your own experiences with anxiety and depression, and what are the things that are helpful for you in those experiences.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. And again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to contact the Counseling Center. Blake and I would be more than willing to chat with you, or chat with one of our counselors to get more information or get support in whatever way you need. Take care.